I'm Brennan,
And I'm Braden,
and our play is entitled The Tragedies and Triumphs of Homesteading in Hardin County.
The Homestead Act of May 20th, 1862 inspired many homesteaders to move west. It granted 160 acres to anyone willing to farm the land for 5 years and could pay a $5 filing fee.
The homesteaders endured many tragedies and hardships, but what they went through led to unbelievable triumph.
Our parents and grandparents now live on lands that were settled by the homesteaders. Because of the homesteaders' courage and perseverance, we have settled the West, towns have been built, and life has become easier.
I will be portraying my great-grandfather, Kenneth Bergdorf, who homesteaded with his father, Otto, on the land that I live on today.
And I will be portraying Miles Jacobs, the person to live on the land that was originally homesteaded by Ophelia Johnson and that my grandparents live on today. Hey there, Kenneth. What can I do you for?
I was just wondering if we could talk about old times. My grandson is really interested in how we lived back then, and I could use a few of our stories.
You know, those were the good old days.
Yeah, they were rough, but boy, were they worth it. You remember that blizzard back in 1949? Sure was a brutal one.
Yeah, it sure was. And I remember, up there in the Black Hills, it snowed about 50 to 60 inches. And I'd say we had about the same here in Hardin County. The winds got up to 60, 70 miles an hour, and all around the state. The Army had to come in and drop hay bales from planes just to feed our livestock. And all our cattle would die, they'd freeze to death or die from sickness. And left our ranchers, left our economy on the brink of collapse.
We're lucky we didn't freeze to death.
Yeah, ain't that the truth. But them homesteaders, they were tough. Rebuilt their herds, triumphed over old Mother Nature.
Thing I do remember about them thunderstorms out here in the west, they sure were more tragic and challenging since there were hardly any hills to break up them storms. And when no rain came with them storms, farmers were devastated. They relied on that rain to make their crops and gardens grow. It didn't happen that often, but cattle could get struck by lightning during the storm.
Well, even in the window, you can see them small hills. All them storms would have just came blazing right over the prairie. And when the storms brought lightning without any rain, all them fires started. And the wind didn't help that either. Shoot, I remember when the wind tore crops right out of the ground.
We were lucky we even had crops and there was no rain.
Yep. But they used their wells, used the water that was right under our feet.
Yeah.
Yep. And the wind was sure hard on people living inside houses too. Lots of places didn't have trees to build houses quite as nice as this one. Some folks have to use mud bricks. They had to tear apart their wagons just to build doors and windows. All them people were getting sick easily because there's all that dirt just falling from the ceiling. And all those critters they'd get up in there.
Any house was a good house in locust season though.
We're lucky them buggers is extinct nowadays because that storm in 1865, it did a lot of damage.
Based on newspaper stories I've heard, they came in storms nearly a mile high and 100 miles wide. Locusts ate anything in their path. If you had clothes on the line, they were gone by the next morning. By the time they were done with the fields, they were as brown as the dirt and as dry as the sun. Didn't have to feed the chickens because they were constantly eating all the dead locust guts off the ground. Their eggs tasted awful though.
Yeah, they sure did. But the homestead wives, they could even make the locust eggs taste pretty good.
My grandson is really interested in how we lived back then. I went to show him a few pages from my journal, but it was all wet and ruined. I knew you took good care of yours.
Yeah, I think I've got a couple. Later today I'll have my hired hand send one over.
Okay, thanks.
Have a good day.
Yep, you too.
The land that I live on today was originally homesteaded by my great-great-grandfather, Otto Bergdorf, who then passed it down to his son, Kenneth. Kenneth then passed it down to my grandpa, Gerald, who now ranches the land today. Some of the tragedies they endured was scarlet fever, blizzards, and thunderstorms. Some kids had to get jobs to provide for their families. My family had to trade in business to help them get by.
Hey, I have a surprise for you.
Oh yeah?
Yeah, do you remember my friend Miles Jacobs? Well, he was a homesteader like me. Many of the tragedies that I endured, he did too. That's his journal. He told me you can keep it and use it if you promise to take good care of it.
Wow, this is awesome. I think I'm going to read it with my friend because his grandparents were homesteaders too.
Okay? Better get back to doing them chores. They ain't gonna do themselves.
Yep. land that my grandparents live on today was originally homesteaded on by Ophelia Johnson. She lived in a small dugout on the side of a small valley. This 1888 Winchester belonged to her, and I found it near the dugout that she lived in, but we couldn't bring it to Washington, D.C. From Ophelia Johnson, the land was passed on to many different families and ended in the hands of Painter Incorporated. That is when my grandparents lived on the land, and they still ranch the land today. Hey, guess what?
What?
My grandpa has a friend who is a homesteader. He gave me his journal, and I know your grandparents were homesteaders, and I was wondering if you maybe want to read it.
Sure. Hey, look, June 2nd, 1911. Tornado passed about 5 miles away. Ripped all the trees and copse right out of the ground. Have to start all over on my new stockade. Lucky me and the cows are okay. Can't find a couple of my chickens though.
Oh, look. That's where his wife died. Oh, here's a better one. Today, that raccoon was back. He tried to eat the chickens again, but I wasn't gonna let him. I grabbed my gun and dropped him. And I hope that sends a message to all those chicken-eating varmints out there.
These stories are great.
Yeah. I wonder what inspired all of these risk-takers to move west.
I heard that Daniel Freeman from Ohio, he was the first homesteader to file his claim. He filed it on January 1st, 1863. Inspired many people to take the risk and pioneer in the West.
I bet a lot of them wanted to be free from all the cities and not live on the open land.
Probably wanted a better life for the descendants like us.
If you think about it, you and me, we're the triumph of the homesteaders.
Many of the town's houses and ranches that have been built have been because of them.
You know, living through tragedy to bring triumph to the future. Now that's one for the books. The tragedies and hardships our grandparents as homesteaders experienced in the mid-1900s must be considered in our story, but the first homesteaders were certainly among the bravest in their strife to build homes and establish communities. When they first came here, there was absolutely nothing. The land that they plowed their fields in had never been plowed before. And stories said that when they used their horse-drawn plows to plow the fields, it made the sounds like peeling heavy duct tape. Lots of places didn't have trees to build houses, so they resorted to using sod. And for firewood, they resorted to using cow or buffalo chips. And oftentimes, this caused problems.
Many had families to help keep them company, but sickness and lack of anything close to a doctor was the cause to loss of loved ones. Homesteaders had to learn to treat their wounds and minor illnesses. Lords had many children to help them out on the ranch. The extra hands were the extra food needed. Homesteaders were living with next to nothing. The only thing that had to help them persevere was hope. They hoped that their children had a better life for their children.
We are the children of the homesteaders. The triumph.
Well